name is Walter Byron. I'm chairman of the planning board, and welcome to the Norfolk Southwood Community Forum. Other members of the planning board are with us this evening. John Weddleton, Aaron Hunt, Gary Searle, and Chad Peck. And also with us are Kevin Calcutt from the Select Board, and Blythe Robinson, Town Manager, and Richard McCarthy, our Town Planner. So tonight is an opportunity for sharing. The town will provide information on Southwood, its history, and the development opportunities that it offers to the town. And after that, the floor will be open, excuse me, for input from the town citizens with an eye toward what might make sense for developing Southwood, and to hear what ideas you may have towards that end. So before we begin, perhaps Kevin and or Blythe would like to add a little bit. Kevin?
He's not.
Is he on mute? I can't see because there's so many people.
Yeah, he's on mute.
Is he coming aboard here, Rich?
I see him. He's on. He's on, but he's on mute.
Well, I know he wanted to say a word or two, so let's just wait a few seconds, see if we can encourage him to take his mute off and speak.
Sure.
I think the administrator can unmute him.
Is that you, Betsy?
No, it's me.
It's Rich. Okay, all right.
But he's on mute by choice at the moment, so. Give him a.
Well, while we're waiting for Kevin, perhaps Blythe, would you care to add anything at the front end of this discussion?
Happy to, Walter. Good evening, everybody.
Here's Kevin.
So tonight, we're excited to provide the planning board and the whole community a background and overview about Southwood Hospital. And we come with this tonight with no preconceived notions about what should happen to this site in the future. The goal really for tonight is to help everybody level set about their knowledge about the history of the site, its zoning, the constraints it has, the opportunities it has, and the Facebook updates and the community conversation has actually been quite helpful in the last couple of weeks as people have shared their thoughts and their concerns. It's helped us frame this conversation. So we're hoping to provide everybody with a thorough overview of the project, and Rich McCarthy is leading that. He's done a great job putting the presentation together. And then the next part of the meeting tonight is to listen, is to gather feedback from people about what further questions they have, the concerns they have, the things that they would like to see happen, so that all of us can be informed about this. And from there, for whomever comes forward to work with us on changing Southwood from what it is today to something else, we can work towards what hopefully will become a good outcome, a balanced approach to what's right for Norfolk. So I'll leave it there. I think Kevin is unmuted. And perhaps he's got some other thoughts. I'll toss it back to you, Walter.
Thank you, Blythe. All right, Kevin, if you're there.
I am. Thank you, Walter. And it appears my fashionable lateness left me behind Blythe, so she covered everything pretty well. I did just want to note that, we have not defined any path forward as it pertains to this site yet. As part of the normal process for being able to establish which way the community and the town can move forward collaboratively, this is one of the many steps that we're going to take to be able to figure out what that looks like. Over the course of the last couple of weeks, I know that there was a catalyst by an interested party who wanted to purchase the site and go with a certain route and presented a preliminary plan to the planning board. And the engagement since then has been, inspiring. We appreciate everybody's thoughts, comments, and input up until this point. But the big part and the big takeaway for tonight's meeting will be your input. So after we get through the presentation, the outline, the background, please raise your hand, share your thoughts, share your perspective, ask your questions, because that's what's going to help shape how we move forward together on this. So thank you everybody for joining, and I really do look forward to the conversation.
Well, thank you, Kevin. I just would like to add one more thing. Let me just state right up front that the proposal for that large warehouse has not been agreed to by anybody on the planning board. We have sat through and listened to a concept as provided on a sketch showing what they wanted to do, but that's as far as it's gone. And as you probably know, and we'll talk more about later, warehouse is not an allowed use in that district. All right, so with that said, let me turn it over to Rich McCarthy, who will lead us through the Southwood presentation, which Blythe referred to.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Richard McCarthy, Norfolk Town Planner. And just to add, as I start the presentation, once we get through the presentation, we'll open it up to the community exchange, and which will be moderated by the chairman of the planning board, Walter Byron. Just want to let you know. So I'm going to present a slide presentation on the property. And what we'll do is we will go through the slide presentation, and more likely I'm sure we'll come back to different slides as we go through the presentation and we get into the discussion piece of the meeting.
That comes.
All right, we'll start here. I think is a good place. This is right directly from the marketing materials from Collier's.
You're going to screen share?
There you go. Thanks. Good catch. All right, try again. There we go.
Okay.
All right. As I just mentioned, this just shows an aerial perspective from the Southwood property through the market material from Collier's Real Estate Group. The next slide. Again, just some aerial perspectives of where the property lies within the town of Norfolk and the surrounding community. You could see Boston on the left slide and to the south, 495 on the right slide. This map here is just to show you from a community setting as the star, although I will note that where my cursor is, this is as part of the site as well. So these two parcels together makes up the 86 acres for the property, the Southwood site. I'm going to pause here a little bit so people have an opportunity to take a look at this, but this was something that was put together by Collier's to be able for this meeting tonight to give folks a little bit of a time frame of the marketing efforts that had gone on from the property, really starting back in 1997 and of course up to 2021 now at this point. So you can just see some of the inquiries from interested parties and then some of the proposals that were being considered for the property. I think the one that we will get into a little bit more detail, just because it certainly was a topic of discussion at the community level on social media, is really the one that you see there in 2010, which was the Hoboken Brownstown development, which is one of the proposals that went through extensive review with the community from a zoning perspective, from a developer's impact perspective and analysis, and was, at least at that point, thought was going to be carried forward toward development. However, that did not proceed as originally thought. So we arrived to where we at today. But I will show that one later on as we get into it, just so people can see the composition of what was being proposed at that time. I think this slide really provides a nice overview of the zoning districts within the area. So if you see C6 down here on the right-hand side, that's actually the zoning district, which makes up the entire Southwood property site area. It's really its own separate zoning district, unlike the other zoning districts in the town of Norfolk. We do have on the C1, that's just to the south, which is where, Route 1A, Dedham Street, and then east-west direction through here is Route 115, which is Pine Street, and then Pond, which is the other commercial corridor. And then the residential districts to the east over here. Important, which we'll take a look at further on, but this diagonally dashed line here, they see this kind of curved shape district or boundary. That's the zone 2 for the wells at the prison.
Yeah.
So that represents a higher level of protection as far as what land use gets developed underneath it. And there are different requirements as it relates to sanitary requirements within the zone 2. Now this here, we'll come back to it later, but it is regulated by the Department of Environmental Protection. So that's something that needs to be taken into account with any proposal on this site going forward. As the chairman mentioned earlier, this slide here gives you an idea of some of the present uses that are allowed within the C6 zoning district. There are there's 2 different zoning types of uses here on this table. Actually 3, sorry. But one is allowed by right, and then another one's by special permit. Essentially, by right, allow somebody to go forward and do that development project. When the uses described there on the right-hand side, a special permit, use that the planning board or the ZBA in this particular case has a right to deny somebody. So it's not necessarily given. There's the ability to say no to a project. So it's a higher bar for a developer to have to try to meet. And we're gonna kind of reiterate this, I think, several points throughout the discussion, particularly any zoning change, no matter this district, any district, requires to go before town meeting. So in this case, obviously the Norfolk town meeting. That zoning could happen at the annual town meeting, a fall town meeting, or if perhaps there was a special town meeting. In any respect, any town meeting vote on the zoning requires
Is that my email doing that? I don't know.
two-thirds vote to have the zoning pass. So I think that's important just for context for.
Rich, you're on mute.
Why did I do that? How did I mute myself? Okay. All right. Now, did you hear what I said about this slide?
No problem we can create. Rich, you're probably going to want to start over with the slide. We're really having a hard time hearing you.
Okay. Start over this slide.
Does somebody have a mute all function?
Yeah, hold on a second. that's me. All right. So, all right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. All right, I'll start here. I think this will be a good, as I was saying, which probably a lot of you didn't hear, fortunately, so I apologize for that. This C6 zoning district that's outlined here in purple and a little bit lighter purple is the zoning district where Southwood property lies. It's its own separate zoning district. It doesn't have any other districts like it in the town of Norfolk. This curve shape here, which is superimposed on this map, is the zone 2 for the wells at the prison. Why that's important is under zone 2, there are additional requirements that need to be met as it relates to wastewater in particular, that any development on this property would have to adhere to, as well as other uses within our zone 2 district. I'll do a recap on this. So this table here, or this slide, is to represent what's allowed presently in the district, which is on the left-hand column, they're allowed uses. Essentially, the common term is allowed by right. You come before the town through a site plan approval process, through the planning board, and ultimately you would expect that you would get approval at the end of the day. On the right-hand side, the ones that are listed as special permit are discretionary. Somebody could apply for these uses, try to develop them before the zoning board of appeals, but they're not guaranteed that they would be granted. The zoning board has the ability to deny that type of use under this category. And then the bottom of this page, which is listed as prohibited uses, we specifically list a bunch of uses that are prohibited. The way the Norfolk zoning bylaws are structured, if something isn't listed in the use table, it needs to be able to fit within these one of these use categories. If it doesn't, then the default position of the town will be that it's prohibited. So that's important to note for any discussion as we go forward with this property. Again, I'll touch on this slide, which is any zoning change for this zoning district, which is a C6 for Southwood, have to go to town meeting. It could be an annual town meeting, special town meeting, a fall town meeting, or a separate special town meeting, but it requires a 2/3 vote to pass the zoning bylaw change that's proposed. Equally important companion to this is if there's a zoning bylaw change that's proposed and it doesn't receive a favorable recommendation by the planning board, then it can't come back for 2 years. So that's another level of oversight from the town, from the local planning board that has as it relates to zoning matters. The only way something can come back before that 2-year period is unless it's significantly different than the original proposal. But be that as it may, just remember that the planning board does have a very significant role as in the zoning bylaw changes, as one would expect. As we know, or may not know, the 2 stars represents, as I mentioned before, the approximately 86-acre site. We do know there's contamination on the site from the hospital related to the landfill on there, as well as the building. They will require additional assessment, and after the assessment process, which would be directed by the Department of Environmental Protection, they would have jurisdiction over it. A cleanup plan would need to be presented to them to remediate the contamination, to be approved, and then implemented going forward. As I mentioned on this slide, it's important to remember too that there is asbestos within the building. There might be other things, but at least we do know there's asbestos, which will require additional work as far as remediation before demolition. So that is something that anybody would have to deal with. It also means that the removal of those buildings would certainly be at a much higher price as if there was no asbestos within them. The next bullet, which is important, is relates to water and sewer. So we do not have municipal sewer in town, essentially in town, period. There is a little bit in Norfolk Center, but for discussion purposes, we do not have municipal sewer. So wastewater would be done by the applicant, whoever developed the site, through either a septic system scheme on the property or a wastewater treatment plant, but that's yet to be determined. Depends on how the site were to be developed. We do have municipal water in the area, and as we get going later on, I'll pull up a slide which will show you where the water is in proximity to this particular property. It will need to be extended there for whatever development were to occur there. But be mindful that one of the things that, as people well know, we do not have an overabundance of water supply within the town of Norfolk. So water is very critical as far as any use that goes on this property as it relates to the town as a whole. As I mentioned before, there are specific zoning uses. If those are different than what's there, they will need to be changed. So this slide is, excuse me, is really kind of a slide that we kind of look to think about as triggering the conversation. We know about, as I just mentioned, about the environmental cleanup on the site, impacts to the surrounding neighborhood. Certainly, as you know, at least that initial proposal in December included housing on it. As I go a little bit further into the presentation, there has been other planning efforts from town, within the town of Norfolk, talking about housing at this particular site. So that's not necessarily new as it relates to this proposal and prior proposals. There's other work that's been done as it relates to housing. So we'll get into that a little bit further. I thought it'd be helpful to just kind of lay out some things that, at least from a developer, that they would need to be thinking about, and no matter who that developer is. They need to put forth a proposal that could be built on the site that works and fits with the town. They would have to work with the town as it relates to the deed restriction that's on the property. Right now, there's a deed restriction that was part of the sale of this property with the state of Massachusetts, which will need to be, if for whatever proposal, would have to go to town meeting. A town meeting vote would need to be had to remove that restriction, which then would then go to the state legislature, where they would have to vote to remove that restriction. So that's a significant bar in the whole story of this particular property. It's not like many other properties that are, acquisition is a piece of it, and then you go through a permitting process. Maybe the zoning doesn't match up. That's a whole nother layer that this property has, unlike other properties that are within this town and other towns. As they get into, what are the impacts to the community? What kind of things need to be done to look to remediate any of those impacts that would be caused by the development? Those are considerations that they need to be thinking about. Some of those things would happen earlier in the discussion, but oftentimes a good part of that would come through the permitting process, when there would be more traffic studies, water analysis, survey work, wetland delineation, more of the deep analysis in a property, where more of those things would come to light. But certainly they need to be thinking about those things going into this, as well as, can I construct something that I can work with the town on, and there's ability to make it work, to pay for this. They are someone that's trying to make money at what they're doing. So they need to kind of give those considerations going into it. This here just gives you a an overview, as I mentioned earlier, the DEP has jurisdiction as it relates to the cleanup of the property. I'm not going to read through all these, but, and we will, just as a note, we will post this presentation afterwards up on the town website, so you can come back and look at it later on afterwards. But this here is just to kind of give you just a taste and a feel of, you know, that this type of a contaminated site is under the DEP, the Mass Contingency Program. You've probably, if you followed along a little bit over the past years or so related to, you know, 17 Lawrence Street, Buckley, Man, you probably have heard a lot of the same discussion. That's a similar situation there. And in that particular site, you know, there's a public involvement plan that has been brought forward with, that was part of the process with local citizens involved with the assessment, and at this point it's on hold, but ultimately further assessment and cleanup of the site. But this is the program that would fall under. That's something that they would have to adhere to. Again, quickly, I kind of touched on this, I think in some respects. Removal and cleanup on eyesore, hopefully be able to provide some tax help to the town. So whatever taxable type use, if that we go down that path, we obviously want to look at it from a service delivery, service demand too. And that's important balancing. We don't want to necessarily encourage uses that become more of a burden from a tax perspective as well. We got to try to strike a balance. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, the affordable housing is, this site has been identified to help with that. So I'm going to just go to the next slide. I'll talk, so this goes, and we'll talk about the affordable housing just a few slides further, but so really two questions. One question is I talked about earlier, how much water is needed to develop that? We don't necessarily, we have some ideas from previous proposals, but we don't know for sure. We'd have to do further analysis. Our water situation is a little bit different than the previous proposals time, but be mindful we have to look at water supply. You can see here, these lines on this diagram represent the water, the town water lines. So you can see here, there is an 8-inch line here. There's a 12-inch line over here that's on Route 1A. Depending upon what type of use gets developed here, will play a part in the sizing of the piping to get it there from a fire protection and supply standpoint. So while this is what's here today, this could shift differently. It's important to note that the water extension to the property would be something that a developer would have to incur that cost to do. It's not something that would be done by the taxpayers or people within the water district through them paying for the extension. That would be done with private dollars. All right, so I'll transition. As I mentioned to you, they have planning efforts from before 2007. There was a master plan done with a working committee of a master plan. So you can see here back in 2007, Southwood Hospital was identified that is a contaminated site that needs to be cleaned up. So clearly, you know, it has been on the town's radar that we do need to clean it up. And that still remains the case, obviously, today. Again, this is just a blurb from the economic development section of the bylaw, but it does, the town has looked at this particular area providing some tax benefit to the town residents of Norfolk. Now that tax benefit, you know, can certainly come in different shapes. There's the possibility that some residential type housing, if that were to be developed, can be more of a tax revenue positive than other types. So certainly that could play a part of this, but nevertheless, the town has looked at this site as an area for economic development opportunity. This is just similar statement. One of the things that we'll touch on too is right after this slide, we'll get into the 40 affordable housing, where we're at as it relates to the town. The reason why I want to just show you this slide is that there's a term here called 40R, which we'll touch on a little bit when it talks about affordable housing, which is a companion to 40B, but it's a little bit different in some ways. That was something that was at least identified as a possibility back in 2007. So this is a more recent plan, the housing production plan that was done in 2017. And you can actually, by a group of volunteer citizens in the town, along with staff. I wasn't here at this particular time. I actually got done before I arrived, but the previous planner, Susan Jacobson, the Affordable Housing Trust Director, the town administrator, and volunteer committee, the planning board, as well as the Affordable Housing Trust were involved in the creation of this plan with this consultant. This plan here is a critical piece as it relates to 40B in the town of Norfolk, and it also relates similarly to other communities in the state of Massachusetts. With this particular plan that was developed by the town and certified by the Department of Housing and Community Development, when you have a certified housing production plan, which we do, this one plan, it's effective until October of 2022. Depending upon the size of affordable housing projects that come into town, you can get a temporary respite as it relates to 40B projects. For the town of Norfolk, if it's 16 units, which is based on our housing numbers, you could get a 1-year respite. If there's 32 units approved in 1 year, you can get a 2-year. We have achieved 2 years because last year in 2020, three projects were approved that produced more than 32 units. So we are in what we'll term safe harbor, which allows the town to be in the position similar to a town that achieves 10%. So Chapter 40B, which was enacted in 1969, essentially says every community in the state of Massachusetts should have at least 10% of their housing stock that is affordable to people making 80% of median income or less. We have, with the projects that were approved, we are in what I call safe harbor. So that way, if a project comes in now at this point and the town doesn't feel it's a viable and a good project for the town, you can outright deny it. In the case when you're in the situation like we are with safe harbor, unless it was really something good, somebody wouldn't even spend really most likely the time or money to try to file something that wasn't viewed by the town as potentially favorable. But I will say, so this next slide represents one of the goals in the housing production plan was to look to this property for production of affordable housing. What I want to note within this, you do see the site is now rezoned for 55 and over. I think important point to just bring up at this time would be that affordable housing as it relates to households of 55 and over is shifted from the subsidizing agencies to a discretionary option. There had been towns, and we are one, that we just had a 40B approved that was 55 and over, but discussions between subsidizing agencies like Mass Housing and others, in order for somebody to do an affordable 55 and over project, they would evaluate each community based on 55 and over housing they have. It could also be housing within the region, household size, so that it's a discretionary opportunity now, or actually, I guess opportunity, I guess probably a fair way to say it. So it's not I don't want people to think that it's not a given. Let's put it that way. And so I just want people to be mindful of as we kind of get into discussion about this property as going forward. Again, probably just stating what I've already said, but this is a site that could very well serve for a mix of housing types. Oh, sorry. Too quick on that. There we go, sorry. And obviously, as well as the housing production plan, recognize the environmental contamination on this site that need to be remediated as part of any development. And the good thing about, depends who you look at it, but I think from the town's perspective, if we were developed for residential housing, that's the highest bar. So that's the highest level of cleanup that would need to happen on the site as compared to maybe some other uses that wouldn't necessarily need to have it cleaned up to that extent because of the reuse of it. But the piece of the puzzle, which potentially could include housing here, would lend its way to getting the site clean to the much higher standard. So this gives you a snapshot. I just wanted to show you, go through the numbers real quickly. So at the top was in 2010, 118 affordable housing units that the town had at that census time. Since then, we've added from 118 to 187 where we're at presently. We have a fantastic affordable housing trust working with the Community Preservation Committee. We have created 16 affordable units, but from 2010 to 2019 is actually one more. We don't have credit for it, but we will get that. And then these are from 40B developments that occur between 2010 to present. This is the number of dwelling units in the town of Norfolk at 2010. So essentially we're at 6% as it relates to 40B as I'm speaking to you this evening. However, which is actually probably a fairly high, however, is it's now 2021. So at the bottom of this slide, you'll see 3,602. That's taking a look at dwelling unit counts that were built in between 2010 and 2019 in the town of Norfolk from our building department. So we're estimating when the census comes out, that's what our new dwelling unit count will be. So at this time, you can see there was 490 dwelling units created over that 10-year period. So now the benchmark for 10% shifts to this new number, and that new number stays constant until 2030. So, the more proactively we continue to work towards trying to get to 10%, we very well could reach with a good project that works for the town, or it could be a few different projects, get to 10%. And if we reach that benchmark, then the goal shifts towards continuing the work to maintain that as we go forward. So this slide here gives you an idea of the projects that were approved and under construction, and gives you the breakdown of how they split out. And as I mentioned to you before, the enclave is off of Village Green, which is 55 and over. So this over here is the subsidizing agency. When it says letter of approval, MH is mass housing. The next slide gives you an idea of how we just achieved that safe harbor, which is these three projects that were approved. Interesting enough, the project at 194 Main Street, had originally came in as a rental project, and I don't know, had it continued on as age restricted, whether that would have been able to get approved or not in the end. Nevertheless, that didn't end up that way. There are 36 townhouses. It became an ownership project, and that's the breakdown. And then there is one that's active before the Zoning Board of Appeals right now, which is, apologize, I forgot the T on street there, but 35 Pine Street, which is on 115. And just for informational purposes, that is the letter that we have from the Department of Housing and Community Development to Chairman Calcutt that says that we are in a safe harbor, breaks it down in the time period for which we are in safe harbor. One of the things that we're going to look to do is to work towards develop a new housing production plan. So that way, when 2022 comes around, we will have got a plan developed and brought back to the state to be approved, because it's important not to have a gap. If we have a gap, then until we get a housing production plan back approved, we couldn't get credit for if the project, the housing production plan expires. So it's important to keep that up. Now, just quickly go through the side, then we'll get to community input. As I mentioned to you before, 40R is similar to 40B. It's a companion program. If you've been following along with some of the work we've been doing with B1, we had a discussion about earlier this year. If not, B1 is Norfolk Town Center, for those that don't know what B1 means. So the difference between 40B and 40R is that essentially a 40B is an overlay district approved by town meeting. If you create this overlay district, there is financial incentive payments that are provided to the town upon creation of the district. Housing that is within the district counts towards your 40B inventory, and it would be consistent with meeting goals of the housing production plan. This gives you an idea, which is a little bit different than probably people would think about with the 40B program, 40R. There are minimum densities that the state requires. So in the case of multifamily, it's 20 units per acre. If it's 2 or 3 family, it's 12 units per acre. And then if it's single family, it's 8 units per acre. There can be a mix of those. But the important part is that it does get approved by town meeting to get created. There are design guidelines that can come part of it. So you can regulate materials, lighting, landscaping, outdoor features, road design, etc. So that we'll touch on that later. What I want to do now is just touch on a little bit of some higher points about how you move forward, or do you move forward. So first off, the property is under agreement from GIF partners. Some of you probably had seen whereby in the environmental report where there was a closing date of January 12th. That was an actually accurate date. It actually was January 15th, but they didn't close January 15th. So at the moment, the property has not closed as of yet. That will be yet to be determined if it closes. So some of the things that obviously this will be a first conversation. We'll have to have other conversations as we move forward. And even if this development proposal doesn't move forward with this developer, I think it's certainly something that we need to kind of continue the conversation to have a thought and maybe a little more proactive plan in place if this doesn't go forward, how we want to see that property develop. So this conversation about Southwood needs to continue regardless whether this developer moves forward or not. I will say that a little bit unusual, this property would be under agreement and purchased as is and then go through a permitting process. It does happen, but it's not as typical. We would normally expect somebody to have property under agreement and then go through the permitting process with the town. Not the case at this point. I do say that we need to develop a flow chart because there are multiple things that need to be looked at when it comes to this property. And there are some natural sequences, but there are some that need to be talked about as we go forward. I do want to mention, as I said earlier, that whatever development happens on this site, there will be planning board involvement, absolutely Board of Health, Conservation Commission, because I do have slides where there are wetland resources on the property, so that they would certainly be involved. Depending upon, excuse me, what happens from a permitting standpoint, it could be very well the Zoning Board of Appeals, as well as the Planning Board. As I mentioned to you before, if there were any zoning changes, it would have to go to town meeting, and regardless if it was going forward as is under the zoning, the deed restriction needs to go before town meeting to be removed, and then again to the legislature. So I think this will transition to where we'll open it up for questions. I think I appreciate everybody sharing their time with us tonight. And at least I can say, I think this is the biggest Zoom meeting we've had as a record, which is, I think one thing I've learned through this past year, I think the ability to do these meetings virtually has really increased the amount of participation, which once we get back to, let's say normal, whatever normal is, hopefully sooner than later, as I wish we all probably want, that we continue to use this as part of our conversations with the community, because it's certainly, I've seen it work well on other projects so far over this past year, and certainly tonight. So what we'll do is I'm going to actually jump that slide. I'm going to stop sharing for the moment. So as I mentioned to you, what we'll do is there's quite a few people on here. So certainly I raised the hand. I already see one hand raised. Use the raise your hand function. And as I mentioned before, Walter Byron, who's the chairman of the planning board, will kind of moderate, and between myself and Betsy Fidgel, we'll kind of see hands being raised and so forth. So we'll try to make sure we get everybody covered. And I don't expect that, I'm sure there'll be questions that'll be brought up tonight we'll not have answers for, that we'll have to do follow up on going forward, but we'll do our best. So first hand is Karen.
Rich, I'd like to just put some ground rules out.
Sure. Yep.
Apparently there are over 60 people on this Zoom call, so that's an awful lot of folks, and probably most of them would like to speak. So I would say that everyone who wants to speak will be given an opportunity to do so. But if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. Pardon me, and Rich will let you in. And I'd like to have one speaker at a time, please, and no crosstalk between you and the person next to you on the screen here. It just gets out of control if you do that. So please direct your questions and comments to me and to Rich, and we'll see if we can keep an orderly process going here. Hopefully we will not have to limit the time of any individual speaker, but we want to make sure that everyone who wishes to speak gets an opportunity to do so. So with those as ground rules, please let us begin.
So as I mentioned, Karen was the first one I saw. Riley.
Hi, thanks. Rich, you talked about the contamination on the land for the benefit of everyone on the call. Can you talk about how it's a tier 1 contamination site that's still requiring remediation and it's under a temporary solution? Thanks.
Sure. So I'm not sure I'm going to provide the best answer on the tier 1. So I'll kind of I'll have to follow up on that one. I'm not the expert on that. I will say that the temporary solution is that they applied for, they being the LLC that's holding the property, that in order to clean up the site, they need to find somebody to purchase it, to develop it. They don't have the financial means to clean it up. So that's why it's listed as temporary. And so which is a property owner can file for that with the Department of Environmental Protection, where they say that the level of contamination versus the resource that they have and the cost to clean it up, they can't afford to clean it up. It can be granted, which it is granted in this particular case by the DEP. And it's essentially, it says that, you know, when the property is sold, whoever develops the property, the cleanup will come along, because that developer will need to pay for the cleanup. And I think it's important. I'm glad you started with that one, actually, because the at the higher level, the MCP program for contaminated sites in the state of Massachusetts, really, it's a privatized professional where there's licensed site professionals that do evaluations to the site, do assessments, and come up with a remediation plan and cleanup of it. And but the expectation is that the development, whatever that development is, that's the vehicle to pay for that cleanup. So that's, you know, there's some variations to that, but generally speaking, that's the, you know, the function of the program, to have development pay to have the site cleaned up. I do see, hopefully, I will have to get back to you on the tier 1, although I see, let me just scan. I see Andy Baganowski's hand up, so he happens to be pretty well versed in this topic. So I don't know if he's got a different question or he wants to comment on that question.
Rich, I can help you on the tier 1 classification and for Karen's edification. The tier 1 simply is because the zone 2 that you identified, that's considered a highly critical sensitive receptor, and the numerical ranking that's done based on the contamination, simply the numbers added up, so it becomes a tier 1 site. The tier 1 doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go any quicker or any slower than a tier 2 site. It's just that that's the numerical ranking. However, when you put things in the context of the temporary solution, realize that the administrative consent order that was signed back now almost 18 years ago had a deadline of 2007 where the responsible party was required to come up with what's at that time was called a C2 response action outcome, and the regulations have changed, and now it's called a temporary solution. So that being said, if you've read the files, and I've read the files way too many times already, that the temporary solution has constantly been extended and extended and extended. The DEP has been allowing that, and one of the reasons why they've been allowing it is because with the information that they know about the site, and I want to make it clear that what people know about the site versus what they don't know about the site could be a lot more. There could be a lot more that's there. Given the known petroleum contamination that's out there, it's number 6 fuel oil, it's not going to move. So that's why the definition, the terminology that's been used, there's no significant risk. Given what I read in the recent report that was issued last year, I mean, there's floating oil on the water out there. It's anywhere from 4 inches down to just a sheen and 1/8 of an inch in one well. Previously, they had up to 4 feet in some of the wells. So the question is, where did that 4 feet go? And the current well array is definitely not sufficient to identify where the oil has gone, if it has moved. But again, we don't know, because the work basically has stalled since 2007. There's been testing, but it's been limited. There's 17 wells out there, and only 4 were actually sampled for the last report that was done. But again, you're looking at the PRP, the responsible party, is simply maintaining compliance with the DEP requirements, and that's acceptable for the DEP. That's acceptable, but I think we should be able to leverage that they should start moving forward towards cleanup, and whether it's a phased approach or they go all in, your guess is as good as mine. 2 other things on this site which really are not well defined is, even though the wastewater treatment plant has been abandoned and closed down, and that falls under a different regulation, the mass contingency plan, there are closure requirements under the state to close out those filter beds. And knowing what I know about filter beds that were from that era, especially at MCI Norfolk, the stuff that you will find in those filter beds, and when the filter beds at that prison were closed, now almost 25 years ago, we found a lot of stuff in there that was regulated. So that's something to think about too. And then the other thing too is the landfill. I don't know of too many people that have been on the landfill that are still in town. I was there when you could see tires, you could see refrigerators, you could see x-ray equipment. There was a whole pile of morphine vials that were there. Not that I use morphine, but since my wife is an oncology nurse and this was a cancer center, I've seen what the vials look like, and they were still full. Obviously, they were expired, but again, there's stuff in there that hasn't been quite adequately characterized too. So that's another thing that's going to have to be looked at. How this whole thing fits in with the MCP as it relates to the landfill, I have no idea, and I don't know if people are going to expect the landfill to be closed under the mass contingency plan. It could, and there are provisions to do that, or is it being handled under the solid waste regulations? And if that's the case, there's a lot of work that's going to have to be done just to meet those requirements. So, and I talked enough.
Thank you. That was very helpful, Andy. Thank you. Jen Nguyen?
Rich, yes, thank you. Andy just depressed me. I'm like, oh my God, that sounds horrible. I want to say thank you for the presentation and thank you to the planning board for your time as volunteers. It's a lot of work, so thank you. And this is all fairly new to me, but I do have a question, Rich, and tell me if I'm correct in this. You're proposing that this will be a 40R, and my question is, if we do go forward with the zoning change to town vote, could it be specified? I believe you did say it could be certain regulations in the warrant that any development built would be age restricted and also specify the number of bedrooms, because I know people know me, if you do, that I'm extremely concerned about the spacing issues with the schools. Really decidedly very nervous. So I would really like to see if there is any housing that it be age restricted. And if it can be specified, is there a chance later on the developer could come back in front of whomever? I'm not sure if 43 would go in front of a ZBA or not, but could they come back and change that age restriction?
Yeah, good question. So the 40R, let me just step back a little bit. I think the overall goal as a town is to try to look to the site to help address the affordable housing situation in town by getting something that's on the rental side of things to boost up the amount of unit as it relates to 40B. Under the 40B regulations, if you have a rental development, it's only required to have 25% affordable. However, you're allowed to count all the units towards your 40B calculation. So if it's 100 units, they only have to be 25 of them have to be affordable, but you actually can count 100 units. So oftentimes you probably see many surrounding towns trying to go after and get a good rental project because it boosts up their numbers to get closer to get to 10%. The reason why we're just giving consideration to the 40R is a couple of things. One is that it requires a town meeting vote to establish the overlay district. And within that overlay district, you break out the housing types that you want to have. So it allows you really to kind of narrow in specifically on the property to the different type of housing that you want to do. So for example, is the 40R program, at least what I understand, at least initially, you can do some age restricted housing in it as part of the overall overlay district. But one of the things about 40R, which is a little bit better, I think, in some respects than 40B for a town, is that they can be 1 and 2 bedrooms. When you do a 40B, you're required to have 3 bedrooms. So at least 10% of that number, when it comes to 40B, you have to have 3 bedrooms. If you go the pathway by 40R, you're allowed to do 1 and 2 bedrooms. So you don't have to meet that 3-bedroom requirement as a 40R. An additional thing that helps as it relates to 40R is that they have a 40S, which is a companion to 40R, which basically says that you do a calculation, you take that development, you look at and see what kids, if our kids, whatever that number is going into the school system, you take the aid that the school gets as it relates on a per pupil basis, the tax revenue generated, and then the excise tax overall. And it does a snapshot and financial analysis. If the town ends up below, so it ends up in a deficit, there's the 40S program allows payments to the town to make them whole as it relates to school impact costs. There has only been the program, there's only 2 communities that actually have satisfied that requirement, because when you do all the analysis between school aid, tax revenue, excise tax, they fall below that number. So Lakeville is one of them. And also, I think it was Woburn, if I remember. It's definitely Lakeville. But I also think those were looking at more of the single family home 40R variety, as opposed to, what we might consider here. So it was a balancing act, but there is the 2. And the permitting for the 40R goes through the planning board. It doesn't go through the zoning board of appeals. And some of the set-asides that normally would happen in 40B don't happen in 40R. So, you have to, so it doesn't erode away all the other regulations per se. So it's something to give consideration. But the developer has to be really partnered to do that type of project. It's not something that, so there are 40R projects that were successful, but there are also ones where developers have said, you know what, I'd rather go the 40B route. So we really kind of need to, think about it. But it's
so we can't put it in there. We can't put it in to be voted on. Like, we can't put that in as a regulation or.
What? So say that again.
So we can't specify it must be 40R. I guess I'm getting in that it must be age restricted. You're saying it's up to the developer?
We can put it in there, but you certainly can't have all of it age restricted. So you can't, it can be a portion of it, but not all of it. It really, as you can imagine.
I understand we need to get to a certain percentage, but again,
I was going to say that actually. I was going to say more from the housing standpoint. The state level, they try to provide housing for everybody, and families are part of the mix, right? So.
Thank you.
Yep. I see Peter Falvey.
Hi, just interject right now with a quick question, since you were sharing a really great presentation on history of the site. Mm-hmm. One of the proposals that the town worked on extensively, and I think it was even before I and my family moved here, was with Hoboken. And about the time I moved here, I saw some of the community input sessions with, I think his name was George Vallone. And it seemed to be a very good plan. It had a mix of uses. There was open space included, greenway trails. Seemed to be like it was going towards the direction that was actually going to work out. But then suddenly it didn't work out. And the town administrator at that time, as well as the select board chair at that time, said, well, but we have this plan. It could be a good anchor for a vision for the site. We can help, use it as a guidepost for future development discussions. But my question is there any history that you can provide there in terms of, why that particular one didn't work out? And
I can take that, Rich.
Yeah, that would be good.
We worked with George Vallone and Hoboken for approximately 3 years, and worked very hard on crafting a development agreement which would codify what it was he was going to do and how he was going to do it. Then we discovered that it wasn't he who was going to do any of it. It was his intention to sell off the pieces. What you see in front of you on the screen is the housing on the left. I believe there's apartments in the in the middle there, and then there's a assisted living facility, and then there's a commercial building off to the south there. So in each of those cases, it was his intention to sell off to some other developer the rights to build that particular section of the development. And we discovered that despite our best efforts of nailing down a development agreement with him, once he sold that property, we had no development agreement with any of these developers, and they could do whatever the devil they wanted. And it was just not feasible to continue under that arrangement. And maybe the other members of the planning board could chime in, and perhaps John could
I can,
add.
Walter. No one should look at this plan as anything being in any way near factual. This plan was done without stormwater or wastewater testing. I think in the whole 100-acre site, there were like 5 or 6 test holes. This thing ended up being abandoned because the developer, who was actually a real estate broker, decided that he didn't want to do any testing. So what he did is have his students from where he teach lay out all this beautiful coordination. It's not to scale. There is no place for stormwater, no place for wastewater. So the plan is meaningless. But what it can tell you, if you look at the buildings to the right of the housing area is where the best parcel of land is. Ironically, he wants to put the warehouse in that whole section. The front part here that was developed as a second lot, which the town should be concerned about, because this lot to me has no obligations to do anything with the development because it's a separate lot that was established years ago. But on the plan he gave us, where he had the apartments in this whole back area, they're probably going to find that this whole back area isn't going to be able to be buildable for any extent. So the comments about trying to get apartments in there, et cetera, from the person that's interested in buying it, is probably not factual, because nothing really can be done up there. The good part of this whole parcel is up in the frontier, the part that the Caritas people separated this off years ago with the thought that where all the other parts of the land had issues as far as contamination, etc. This was all clean land here, and it was all fronting right on Route 1A, and it also was the closest access to the water source. So I think when you look at this plan, you really should hold this meaningless. Not to say that you could have a third of those housing units in there. I think this probably ended up having 220, but as we continued over a 3-year period to try to get them to do some testing, nothing was done. So this was just a move to get the town to redo zoning so he could flip it to somebody else. That's why this never went forward.
Yeah.
If you like the idea of the components separately, that's fine. And just be aware that the numbers that are on here may not in fact be how they're scaled out.
That's fair, John. And I understand that it wasn't a plan that was to scale or to, had all the infrastructure worked out, but from a component standpoint, it was definitely interesting.
Right. That's what we thought also. That's why we wanted to do the testing, but he would never spend the money.
Thank you.
Donna Jones? Donna?
Oh, Rich, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. You mentioned the deed restriction
Mhm.
and how the process to change the restriction. What is the restriction? What can't be done because of this restriction?
Oh, shit.
You can't build anything but a hospital.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just, it's restricted to hospital only.
Can you hold on a second? There you go. You see on my screen?
No.
All right. Sorry about that. Hold on.
There we go.
See the last, right here? This is the last page of the deed.
I can't read it. It's small on my screen.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
So if you could
That's
please
a-
read it.
Yeah, so it says the premises conveyed hereby are conveyed subject to the restriction that such premises shall hereafter be used only for hospital-related purposes, which restriction is solely for the benefit of the Commonwealth and shall be enforceable by the Commonwealth solely by action by specific performance, all as provided in section 3 of chapter 747 of the Acts of 1981.
Thank you.
Yep. And is there any?
Who's next?
I don't see any other hands up at the moment. Oh, wait, Sandy, Maya.
Hi, Rich. Thank you.
Yep.
I was wondering if someone could find out if they added to the deed restriction.
Ed?
A
Ed?
healthcare facility and assisted living. Does anybody, I thought
I believe it's solely a hospital.
Hospital. Yeah, this is hospital-related purposes.
All right, I'll look into it because I thought I read somewhere that later after that, they added healthcare and assisted living.
Okay. All right, I'm not aware of that, but we can certainly.
If I find it, I'll send you an email. Thanks, Rick.
All right, thank you. Is there any other hands? Oh, Karen Riley.
Me again. Thanks, Rich. Do we know what GFI's experience is cleaning up a tier 1 site like this?
Good question. I don't know off the top of my head without reaching out to DEP. Certainly could find out.
Okay, thanks.
More than likely, Karen, they would bring in a company that just does this for a living. The Hoboken person who was a real estate broker, as I said, it wasn't even a developer, but he just coordinated everything. And he had one company he worked with because he had actually built on a number of hazardous sites in the past. That was his background. And what he actually did was just bring in a company that he subbed the work out to for whatever arrangements they made. So anybody buying this normally wouldn't have per se work and cleaning up themselves. They would just have a substitute contractor come in to do that work.
Yeah, and as I recall, it might even have been the contractor who tipped him to the fact that that site was available.
I think you're
Walter,
right. I think
Walter,
you're
if I could jump in real quick, this is Aaron Hunt, the planning
Yes.
board. Just,
Go ahead, Aaron.
I think it's important too, in that, the 3 years that we worked with the developer on that Hoboken development, there were many questions about the environmental cleanup. And I think the end result of, I think that what put all of the questions, or I sort of, I guess, made it easier to understand what the end result of the remediation would be is that it's required for the development on the site. It's a known contaminated site. So the DEP and the state are going to be involved. So, and they have to sign off on it being clean before anything can be done.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of wiggle room here for a developer to take shortcuts or not do the cleanup the right way. The DEP has very strict regulations about what level needs to be done based on what development is proposed. So, the point I'm trying to make is that this isn't there's not a lot of wiggle room here for them to try and hide behind or do something other than what has to be done and is going to be required and overseen by the state. Thanks.
Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I do have let's see, trying to remember the order. Oh, I think Ann and Sean probably next.
Awesome. Yeah, but my question is, so if GSI, that's what the name is, if they can't build a warehouse on the property, a la Amazon or, such, what have they given an idea of what their plans are, or, what they want to do with the property if they can't do that?
So what they have said thus far is that they want to work. So if they go through with the purchase of the property, as I mentioned, or maybe I didn't mention, but so warehouse isn't allowed there. So so in order to go that pathway, the town would have to vote to make that change. So if they're then the property owners and the town doesn't support the warehouse, then they're gonna, which could very well be the case, they're gonna have to work with the town to come up with a different development scheme to develop the property that works for them in the town. So, if you think about it, I look at it this way, is that it's not allowed what they want to do there. So unless they convince town residents and board members that that's a good idea, we're not starting there. It's really, what's on the books right now in that zoning district is what they can do. If they want to do something else that's not within the zoning bylaws, then they're going to have to propose changes. And then if that's supported by the town. So they're really, they're taking a big leap in a way, right?
Yeah. But they haven't said what that's supposed to look like, right? They haven't said exactly what that looks like yet.
Yeah, so I mean, they showed a warehouse. They think warehouse is good, and the original the development proposal back in December had apartments. But if the town doesn't support warehouse, then they're going to have to turn to Plan B or C.
My guess in this thing, having developed for a few years, is this is going to be modified, and there's going to be a lot of back and forth. These people are seasoned developers. There's going to be a lot of back and forth, and as we try to tell the developer what they want, I think the people in town should understand that this is not one-sided, because they need a zoning change or they need a write-off of the deed restriction. Kevin Calcutt had asked me a while ago, did he see any way that we could be responsible for the cleanup? And I had some thoughts, and some of the things went back to Lawrence Street. And what came to mind is people don't buy a land with needing all of these amenities or infrastructure without secondary plans. So as I looked at this, I thought of them not getting their way because the town was obstinate. And I thought of them taking this and turning into a big 40B project. And with this particular developer does not do 40Bs, people like Avalon, which is a publicly held company, do. And they could probably fit 1,000 or more units in there. So then we stand with the point, it's got a deed restriction. It has to be a hospital. I can see the case where if we denied the 40B, because we wouldn't lift the deed restriction, I can see a case where the state would make the town do the cleanup, because we fought a 40B project with affordable housing that's needed, and we did it for our own special reason. And they could say to us, in my guesstimate, that, okay, then you're responsible to do the cleanup on the property. So I think as we start to negotiate with them, we might want to keep some of these things in mind, because before they went and ever purchased this, I'm sure they had a lot of backup homework. I'm sure they had contingency plans and some things that we probably aren't even aware of. So to make it good faith, I think is important, because when they do come, I don't think we're loaded with all the ammunition. I think they have a background plan, which somebody else had years ago when that front, what is it, Rich, that 20 acres on the front on 1A, that's a separate parcel?
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was in the range of 20 acres. And that was done to just develop that and ignore all of the cleanup on the other land And it'd be interesting if this developer buys this and he buys it in two entities. If he buys it in one entity for that separate parcel in the front and a separate entity for the rest of the land that has the contamination. But the point being is he's going to have a lot of different alternatives. So it's really going to be in the planning board's best interest and in the town's best interest to make sure that we try to do this in good faith.
It might be possible that he's got a contingent agreement that says, I will close with the archdiocese once I get the town to pass an agreement to allow a warehouse in there.
I think what they did, Walter, when they lowered the price of this land from 2,200,000 to 500,000 or so, before they had a requirement that the people could get permits and they had to clean it up before they even started. So all of that now is gone. They do not have to clean it up before they close on the land. The land is now discounted at 25% of the initial cost, which was low. So I think in that regard, they're just saying, buy it and take it off our hands. We want no more liability for the waste. So that being said, when they went to move forward to do this, I'm sure they have other things in mind if they know that there's two particular restrictions between zoning change and the deed that they're going to have to accomplish to get their mega warehouse in. So I think we'll probably, once they have to feel that we don't want this project as it is, we're probably going to get a feel pretty quick on what the contingency plans may be.
You may remember that in that initial discussion with them, we asked them if they had done housing projects, and they said, oh, yes, we have. And they quoted 2 or 3 that they'd done in Massachusetts here. So you're probably right. That could end up being their fallback position.
And they have also worked on brownfield sites as well. So they have, they did mention they have background in developing contaminated sites before as well. Gary has his hand up, Cyril, from the planning board.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention from the presentation that GFI made previously to us, and the based on limited amount of input they had at the time, the impression I got, I think it was Steve, one of be across this parcel, or even have half of that and make that an income source. I think the sole discussion around 40B was just to tell the town, we realize you have a problem with 40B and we are willing to solve that for you. I think also on that same meeting, the Zoom meeting, there were other people there. Peter was there. And for the first time, I think GFI heard that there was an interest in putting a bicycle path across the property. I think they said they had no problem doing that. All of these things point towards the fact that they are more interested in becoming a partner with the town, helping the town solve some problems, developing the property to, again, make it acceptable to both the town as they are developing something that is a business model for themselves. So that was the impression I got from the first meeting.
Thank you, Gary. Hey, Rich, Kevin wants to speak.
Hey, Rich, since you're on mute, I'll just jump in. I just wanted to quickly point out too that, we've talked a lot about the things that didn't work for this site and the challenges that we've run into. Rich did a great job of pointing out some of the options that are available to us that go outside of just what we had seen before come about. But I think it's important in this forum, while we have everybody together, to reinforce that we want to hear, regardless of what we've talked about, what your expectations are for this site, the kinds of things that you want to see be developed here, because that's what's going to help shape our collective path forward and identify what things we have an appetite to work towards and the things that we don't necessarily have an appetite to work towards. So as we do take some more comments, I would encourage people to not just work within the parameters of everything we've outlined up to this point. If you have a different idea for something you'd like to see there, please raise your hand, call it out, and let's hear it. Thanks.
Okay, so Peter, well, your wife was on, Peter. Is she gone? You want to speak, or? Falvey?
Yeah, I think she had a question that John may have answered in the course of his conversations. I am
Okay.
happy to wait on my comments until others have spoken who haven't spoken yet, but I do have comments I'd like to make eventually.
Okay.
I did have a question. This is Jennifer.
Oh, okay.
Is it okay if I go now?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I had a thought and a question. One was, I did see their presentation as well. And I noticed also that, like what John had mentioned, the apartments were on that land that did require the cleanup. And because so little is known about that cleanup, it also seemed like they just threw that in to kind of, this is possible, but we don't have to put the apartments on there. And my question is, what can we do as a town to make sure we know what is involved in the cleanup? Because it feels like it's a bit out of control, like there's so many things we don't know. So that was my one thing I wanted to ask. And then also just, obviously, we don't want a warehouse. We don't want huge trucks, semis coming through Norfolk on all the main roadways. You're asking what we want. I think we've had enough articles from other towns that have said that really doesn't work. And those towns have had warehouses that were about 300,000, not 600,000. So I think it's clear we don't want that. And I just wanted to make my voice heard about that. Thanks.
Just so you know, Jennifer, and Sandy Myatt is the expert on this, but when the cleanup starts, you folks are welcome to get together and form a PIP program, which is a public input participation, which means that you'll be involved in all aspects on the findings, the determinations, and the cleanup method. So that's something done simply by filing with the DEP, and you can be an integral part of the whole process, which they did at Lawrence Street.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think to just a little bit to that point, as and Andy kind of spelled it out pretty nicely earlier, is that they've been granted extensions to the DEP. So a lot of the questions that everybody always have is really hinging on potentially somebody moving forward to develop the property that's then going to start to engage into further assessment and figure out, the extent of things that need to be taken care of and how to go about cleaning them up. So a lot of those questions, is really kind of waiting on somebody in a way to step forward and consider developing the property, because that's where the property is positioned right now. It's really waiting for somebody to kind of move forward to do that. So I did want to go to actually Dave Moran and then Ann and Sean.
Hi, thanks for taking me. I just want to bring up some of the way things are currently going right now on Route 115. Since the road has been widened years ago, I live on 115. I live it's up by the Foxborough end of town. It's gotten to be the traffic volume on 115. The commercial traffic is out of control right now, and we have no way of controlling that. That is a state road, and it's maintained by the state. And I can't begin to tell you how much road noise and the environmental impact that has taken place since Gillette Stadium's was approved by the Foxborough. In Norfolk had no input in that, but boy, we certainly deal with the repercussions of that. And putting a 90-bay warehouse in that site that'll house 700 trucks on a 24/7 operation that's lit up like a Christmas tree is not the right thing to do in this area. And I would hope that the planning board would take that into seriously and not look at the financial impact to the town, because that's not what matters over here. What matters to the people in this neck of the neighborhood is some peace and quiet that we don't have anymore. The garbage that I end up picking up outside my yard alone is staggering. Take a walk across the street where the stalls own that property, and you'll find a garbage pit over there. And adding commercial vehicles to this area in that volume is going to lower our property taxes, the value on our homes. So I would ask that this building committee or the committees that are looking at the plans for this developer make a recommendation and weigh it towards the homeowners in this area. Not what's going on in the center of town in the tax revenue that's going to be generated for the town for that a 90-bay terminal. It's aggravating to even hear these discussions right now for the people that live in this neck of the woods. This type of development belongs off of 495, right off the highway and right on the highway. So it doesn't impact communities. Thank you.
Do you have any thoughts as far as what you would like to potentially see there, Dave? It's just
we do. My wife and I have been talking about this, and it has to be totally residential. It cannot be commercial anymore. The amount of commercial that we deal with in this area, it comes from Rentham, comes from Norfolk, comes from north of us, east and west of us. It's got to be a residential plan. It's got to coexist with the people that live in this neck of the woods.
okay. All right, thank you. Jack Oliveri, I think you were, I understand, trying to speak. See, looks like I don't see him now. All right, I'll hold for Jack if he can get back in. In the meantime, Anna and Sean, did you have a question, thought?
Yep. So real quick on Dave. I think also too a warehouse would impact the entire town of Norfolk too, right? With all the trucks going all over the town, it would make it backed up everywhere. But also you had Kevin had some you want some input on what we'd like to see. Karen Riley actually did a great survey on the community Facebook page about what everyone wanted to see. And I just thought I'd highlight the top 4. Green space was number 1 with like 300 votes. With the walking, biking, recreation. Commercial was number 2 with 200 votes, and a full site cleanup was number 3. But then also combination residential and with apartments and townhomes was next on the list, and then some kind of services around hospital and healthcare was next. So just some input on what people want to see. I can send over that survey if it interests you guys, what people want to see. Thanks, Karen, by the way.
No, thank you.
That commercial was retail shopping. That was not industrial or trucking. Industrial trucking got 2 votes. I think commercial got like 300 votes.
Okay, great, thank you. That's so Karen, you have another?
So along with that survey, maybe someone could quickly go down and talk about tax revenue that would, be beneficial for some of those ideas. Obviously, green space, I don't think GFI would be making any money on that. So I mean, certainly maybe a portion of the land could be designated for that. But if someone could go through maybe those top 4 things, tax revenue based on, balancing out services in town, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So as you probably all can imagine, the residential is certainly going to have its potential related school impact concerns from a tax revenue. So I think, Jen talked about earlier that, residential, more likely than not, I think for probably a lot of people on this call, they moved and live in Norfolk and view it as a beautiful place to live and raise a family and so forth. So
Rich, isn't the only residential allowed up there is 55 and older?
Right now, yeah.
Yeah, so regular residential isn't allowed right now. So the talk of the school and impacts on that, that's not relevant because only 55 and older housing is allowed there.
Yeah, point taken. So I think I think the question's a little bit current and perspective, right? Looking forward potential. But anyway, so going down the list, it really is related to, I know warehouse is not not one of the ones that people like, but from a service demand, it's probably low service demand with related to tax revenue generated. But there is the traffic impact associated with it. Retail, that's pretty challenging, particularly right now when retail is struggling as it is with brick and mortar. So I don't, it may be specialized, but I'm not sure how much demand there would be for that.
Rich, you're talking about the present situation, right?
Well, I think it was kind of touching on what was in that survey, I thought, right?
Yeah, but in terms of ruling or giving commercial, retail, shopping, things like that a ding, so as it were. Speaking about COVID times, we have to look at it beyond COVID times as well.
Rich, this is Aaron jumping in. Sorry again. I don't know that this question can be answered in this type of a forum either. I think the question's been asked. I think we can take it as a board and a town and address it, and we can try and put a frequently asked questions tag on the website or something to get answers to these things. So, I mean, it's a complicated question, and it depends greatly on many ways that this development might go. So it's going to take more than winging it here as we're talking.
Sure.
My opinion.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yep. Fair point. Point taken. So I see Bonnie McLaughlin.
Hi. I guess just to be, another voice from the Pondville neighborhood and provide some more feedback, since really that's the point and purpose of this. And we really appreciate you putting this together to hear from the community. I did write in with some of my suggestions and concerns, but just to sort of voice it out, in this forum. Obviously, we had some concerns with the very rough draft that was initially presented, got a lot of good conversations going. I'm not in favor of the scope of this warehouse situation in that neighborhood. Just to mention, some other things that were on that draft plan, which I again appreciate the planning board sort of preemptively smacking down some mention in that plan about using Hill Street and the rail bed as access for potential residential apartments. Just to put on the record, I think that obviously is a horrible idea. And of course, being on Hill Street, that was one of our larger concerns with that approach. So, similar to everybody with the concerns about traffic and impact in terms of the scope of the warehouse, I don't know, as things progress, if there could be different scope of other similar projects. I mean, Joe Fran is a sizable warehouse down in that similar area. Obviously, it's not anywhere near the scope of what we're talking about with what they had presented, but I wouldn't rule out some combination. I think some combination is going to be the ticket almost, whether it can include components of residential that have a 40B, that have a 55 and over, that have assisted living. Being from that neighborhood all my life, I actually like the idea of a healthcare component, not to the full deed restriction, but having some form of a healthcare component involved there, whether it's another, clinics like we have at Pondville, I think is a nice type of thing to have in that neighborhood where, you can have services, but it kind of all goes to sleep at night. It would have minimal infrastructure impacts. But maybe the mixture of the tax revenue that involves some sort of service facilities of that nature, it almost could be its own little microcosm. If you have a partial residential with some healthcare components and maybe a small commercial component, like some of what we see at River's Edge. Maybe there's a couple of small shops and a yoga place and a salon for the 55 and over community. I almost see that there's a lot of opportunity there for it to have a lot of different components that in balance could potentially be a win, I think, for the community overall.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me go to Zach. Beaver?
Hey, Rich, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
I just wanted, someone had mentioned the revenue for greenway space. I just wanted to point out that the rail bed is actually sort of removed from the Southwood property on a separate lot that they purchased. So there's even quite a bit of a ravine that separates it as well if anybody's walked out there. So I don't think that will impact much of any of the development aside from having some nice accessible trails back there, just to point that out.
Thank you. Let's see. I do have Ann and Ken McKee, I think, right? Oh, take yourself off mute.
Yep, that would help. Hi, yeah, so we've lived in the neighborhood for 30 years and we really appreciate all of the work you've all put into this so far over the years. I mean, we're well aware of the Ponset Valley. I used to work for Caritas, so I'm very familiar with what's gone on in that hospital system. And like others have said, especially Dave, especially Bonnie, Peter, I mean, this is a great area of town. We've lived here. We pay our taxes just like everyone else. It's a whole different vibe than much of the other part of Norfolk, but it's a great area. And I think we echo the others in that we don't want to see it become a giant warehouse type of operation with trucks coming and going all day long. There is a lot of noise brought to us by Route 1, 1A, 115. Exiting our neighborhood is very difficult already in the morning. It has changed significantly since when we first moved here, which is to be expected. There's development, we welcome, our family in particular welcomes, more controlled residential because we do believe it's a great area. And it offers a lot of desirability with its access to Route 1, with access to 495, 1A. And the concept, like Bonnie pointed out, of putting together like a well-balanced plan of some residential, some retail. I mean, I think I recently begun to hear like the old traditional malls obviously are not doing well now, and they're not predicting they'll do well. And what is doing well are these small little clusters of retail. And that is something Norfolk doesn't have a lot of. We don't have any, we're limited on restaurants, we're limited on the little retail. It would be nice to see a well-developed, partially residential, partial retail, partial healthcare. We have Norwood Hospital closed. We have no idea when that's going to open really. So like there is an opportunity for a developer to like capitalize on all this and come up with a solution that really fits this area better than a large, warehouse plan like is being proposed. Anyway, that's all we have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. So Kay Davidson?
Hello.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just on the development, just wondering if it was thought about maybe doing a solar field or some type of renewable energy, and maybe if a solar field was done, like that, it could supply the energy for our neighborhood.
So there was investigation as far as solar there. If solar could be part of a development, but it wasn't enough for the whole entire site. So it could be part of a mix of development options on the property. So I think it's Massachusetts.
Yeah, it's Rich. It's me, Karen McCabe.
Wow. You're a Spitfire? Is that what
Yep, that's what I am.
All right.
You know that for a fact, right? I was going to actually bring up solar, but thanks for the person prior to bring up that. I do think that's a good option, especially on less desirable buildable area, and especially in an area that water is an issue. Definitely a positive. I don't know the tax revenue for that, but I think that also is a question is, could there be that require the cleanup before any rezoning is done? So that means, have a possible agreement, but make sure that there's a cleanup done and completed and before the actual approval from the town to rezone it.
So I think similar. So back when I know Walter and John and Aaron were on it, with the previous development proposal there, they were working on a developer's agreement. And I suppose, that those would be the considerations to work with the developer on sequencing.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think it's an open discussion.
And
Go ahead.
And yeah, and back to the statement that someone said, well, DEP would be involved, and of course, they'll do a good job for cleanup. Buckley Man is 100% proof that the DEP can be involved, and they never came back and validated that it was done. So I do think that we just can't put all of our eggs into the DEP doing a good job. The town needs to make sure they stay involved and they make sure that they come back out here and go out there and make sure it's done, because that's exactly the issue of Buckley Man. If you recall, they audited it and found out that they just believed the company that they did a good job. They didn't come check it. So just a lesson learned. I know that most of the people on here live over and didn't care, didn't have as much interest in Lawrence Street because it wasn't in that backyard. But it makes sure that if it does get cleaned up, that the town is very involved in making sure that they go back and make sure that it was cleaned up exactly how they stated. Because we wouldn't be in the place we are with Buckley Man if we did validate that they did their job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Mark's iPhone, I think.
Mark Clarisi.
Okay, I didn't see the full name there. Sorry.
That's all right.
Okay.
I'm at 22 Everett Street,
Mhm.
and there's two houses, 22 and 20 Everett Street, that are the closest to the hospital. And I myself, I'd love to see it be a green space. It's nice, it's my backyard. Literally, it's my backyard. Whoever's going to put something in there, they're going to want to maximize the property for the dollars, especially with the cleanup. One thing the planning board has to consider is using the railroad bed, which is part of the easement, as a buffer zone for the neighborhood. I believe there's 7 houses that are really close to the railroad bed. So, I mean, this drawing that came out has an apartment building in my backyard, and I understand it's just a drawing. It's not the real thing. But that's what I ask, is that whatever goes in, use that easement as a buffer zone. So.
Thank you. So, and that topic would start in the beginning and be something that would have to continuously work through if whatever development, what happens as far as buffer goes and screening and so forth.
Yep.
As part of the permitting process. I think, so Donna Santa Barbara, is that all one word?
Yes, it's all one word.
All
Hi.
right.
I live up near Ann, and I go along with what Ann says, excuse me, about trying to get out of the area. I looked at or I called the Foxborough Planning Board, because I would say it was about 10, 12 years ago. There was a traffic study done on the Pine Street area for a warehouse that was to be developed on Annette Street, which runs parallel with Freedom. Irrelevant what that's all about. However, what came out of that traffic study, and Tara Spellman, I think you're on. If I'm wrong, would you correct me? But the traffic study, it couldn't support even that one warehouse for traffic coming in off of Route 1, 1A, 140. There's a lot more involvement here with other towns as well. That being said, I would love to see the likes of a supermarket along with the small retail. I spend most of my consumable money outside of Norfolk, and I'd love to spend my money in Norfolk. I would love to see, perhaps we're going to need new schools, maybe up in this area. But with the contamination there, the other thing people have to understand is we have well waters. So you start mucking around with those contaminated areas, will it affect our aquifer that feeds our area of houses? So I worry about what Bonnie, not Bonnie, the woman over by Lawrence, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, said about follow-up and making sure. Is it going to be possible for us to tie into town water should something happen to the aquifer because of this development? That's it.
Okay. I think that's something we'll have to obviously pay closer attention if we get into the environmental, when they start to do environmental assessment in the area. As Andy mentioned already, that as it is already in the zone 2 for the well, for the prison, so they're going to be cognizant of that from the start. So at least we're starting from a starting point, they've got to be concerned with that as well. So, but we need to stay.
I think there's also precedent in the town for bringing water to an area where there was contamination in the wells. I know up here in my end of town, on Noon Hill, back in the 90s, there was a lot of contamination in the water, and the town ran water up Fruit Street and into the developments off both sides of Fruit Street as a remedy. So there is some precedent for providing water if some contamination occurs in wells.
Peter, and then Jen Lynn, and then not Peter. You there, Peter? Falvey?
I'm here, Rich. Thank you. Let's see. I turned off my video. That's fine. I don't need to do my video. A couple things. One, before I say some comments, Rich, has the town looked at, similar to someone who mentioned the traffic study over there near on the Foxborough side? There's traffic studies, I believe, that Walpole did for the rec fields. Have you guys taken a look at those? Because I would say they'd certainly be telling in terms of the current state of 1A in relation to what would a large warehouse operation do to the current state of 1A.
So just on the topic of traffic, what would happen? So we haven't necessarily dove into them at the moment, but let's just, for the moment, where a development is going to proceed, a few things we would do is they would canvass around the area, the surrounding area, look at traffic studies that have already been done. That would be one of them. There are other ones adjacent towns within the town of Norfolk as well. And then they would preliminarily submit to the town, I would think more likely, okay, here's the intersections that we think should be studied. And then the town would say, well, no, that's fine, but then you need to look at X, Y, and Z intersections. So it's kind of a reiterative process as far as the traffic goes. So yes, they would take that traffic study, some of the other ones that were conducted, as well as do other counts as well at different locations if there's gaps. So it'd be really essentially a combination of kind of layering multiple reports together to do the analysis. And then they would submit that to the town, and similar to other development projects, it would be peer reviewed on behalf of the town. They would pay for the town to hire a professional traffic engineer to go back and make an evaluation and recommendations to the town. So it's kind of both legs of it. This obviously, as you know, because you live there, with Foxborough right next door and having the games at Gillette Stadium, the concerts and so forth, traffic is not, it's much more layered, much more involved than just maybe other sites. So it's not by any means, it's a more complex, because obviously they have to look at that situation, what happens, as you know, you live there during game days, what those impacts are to you folks that live in the area. So the traffic's a big, it would certainly be a big lift and a big part of this, as well as, here's what it looks like. What could be done to improve traffic as well going forward? Yes, it is a state highway as far as Route 115, but that doesn't mean as if there can't be things done to it to offset impacts to residents within the town of Norfolk. So yeah, it is a state highway, but that doesn't mean that things can't be done. We just have to work with MassDOT what those things might be. So I don't want people thinking that you can't work with Mass DOT. You certainly can, and so that would be part of the process going forward if they go forward. So.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, I was interested if you were aware of it. But it sounds like that'll be part of the process. I would just offer my perspective, both on what I don't want and what I do think are good ideas. I will say that similar to most others, I'm 100% opposed to that warehouse proposal that was shown in December. But even if they came back and said we're going to be nice and cut it to 300,000, you're still talking about something the same size as what's in Milford. And they, Milford, Dedham, Hopkinton, multiple towns are getting these, and they're getting after effects of it after everything's said and done. And in Milford, there's a resident. It's documented. If you look up the Amazon warehouse, these trucks, these tractor trailer trucks, are coming through residential neighborhoods to cut through, and they're knocking down people's stone walls at 11 o'clock at night. Whereas the residents are having to call the police department to help them come get the trucks unstuck and back out of the residential neighborhood. These are the kinds of things that are reality happening when these kinds of projects are implemented. So I mean, going to what I would like, first of all, I'd like the town and developer to first commit to a strategy, figure out a strategy for cleaning up the site. Karen made a good point about, DEP and such. There's got to be very close oversight here. What's in the landfill is not known. The extent of what the landfill impacts are not known currently. The materials used to create the landfill are not known, right? So, they could come and say, oh, let's just cap that part of the site and just move on, right? But you can't cap something if you don't know what's in it and you don't know what the spread is. So we have to have an oversight of it that makes sure that the highest quality is done in terms of the cleanup. And then in terms of the site, I think something more mixed that includes elements of residential assisted living, small commercial, some professional services would be a possible great idea. And it would bring a mix of tax revenue. And again, all these things can be done. We have zoning in place to allow these things to be done. The developer, they can do it. They're buying the property for a low price. They will likely get some tax credit for taking on a brownfield site. They have a portfolio and they have a risk-based approach to how they do things. So they may not be as profitable here, they'll be profitable in other projects. So I don't think that, I think the consideration of what's best for Norfolk has to be at top of mind, not a fear of what the developer's going to do in retribution should we not go forward with the warehouse or change zoning for them. So, I would very much like to see a combination of green space, commercial, and residential there. And as Bonnie said, something that goes to sleep at night and something that doesn't entail massive amounts of trucks going through the area, because it will also affect Walpole, it'll affect Rentham, and it'll affect 115 going north into the center of town as well. So it's not just the small area of Pondville that we're talking about. This is a region-wide impact that something this size will have. So I think, at the end of the day, I think we can get good tax revenue. We can call for the highest quality of cleanup, and we can call for the highest quality of development that is something enriching to the town and not just strapping the neighborhoods in the town for the purposes of a distribution site. So thank you for listening.
Jen, Wynn?
Yes, thanks, Rich. No, Peter just said it so eloquently. And just to piggyback on what he said, I agree. We need to really be thoughtful about this because there are many mitigating factors. It's not just one special interest. There's traffic, there's contamination, there are people who have wells over there, personal experience. My poor parents had to redo a new well because of something similar, smaller situation, but that made me think of that. So there are many, aside from schools, the infrastructure and whatnot. I guess I'm just looking for a little clarification. Maybe I misunderstood, and if I did, I apologize. I got a little nervous when I heard that if it didn't pass, that the alternative could be something like an Avalon apartment or something worse. So I guess my opinion is, if that's accurate, that possibly could be a possible situation. Maybe, again, what Peter said, really make thoughtful planning and really look at the contamination before anything. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, well, I know that was John's opinion about the situation. I think he can speak for himself, but I think he was just, the idea is to try to work with some developer, whoever that be, in a good faith cooperative manner to try to get towards an end goal, right? So it's so you're working cooperatively to try to figure that out, as opposed to somebody who wants to use a hammer on the town. We want to have I think that's the tone of tonight, is try to work with somebody to come up with a mutual plan. So that's not something that they're gonna, threaten the town with, that we can figure this out and come up with a plan that works. So that's more that was kind of the sense I got from it, but we also have to, kind of, they need to get in our shoes, the townspeople's shoes, to see your perspective. And then you'll have to work with them to get in their shoes. You know what I mean? So you try to change viewpoints to try to work towards the middle. If both sides kind of work towards a common solution to see both perspectives, then I think we can get to an end that we can do something. But if everybody stays, is not willing to kind of see their point of view and kind of figure it out, then maybe we don't get anywhere. So it's just more try to, I think, look at it as a kind of set a cooperative tone to try to move forward.
Have you tried putting toward the bottom and click reactions?
You want to say something, Betsy?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, gee. Well, you know me in technology. I was just emailing Peter Salby so he could tell me how to raise a hand.
Well, you go ahead.
Somehow I got there. Well, thank you so much, Rich. As you already know from the letter that I wrote, I do have some very, very strong concerns regarding this project coming to a reality. And I don't want to reiterate many comments that have already been made. I just feel that a 600,000 square foot building, or even as Peter said, one half that size, it just doesn't belong there. And just in a nutshell, much thought has been put into it. I know it's not the only idea for what can be up at the Southwood site. My basic opinion, and as I say again, I wrote a letter to the select board and the town people and so forth, officials. I just don't think this is the right one. And I think the right plan is still out there somewhere. I had more things to say, but I'm just going to leave it at that. I do like to write a letter so that in case I don't have a chance to speak, I can say more in written form. So
okay.
Thank you very much. I do like these long, detailed meetings. And I'm glad to know, I think there were 60 or 70 people who attended. Am I correct?
But we were much higher earlier on.
Great. Yeah, I knew that. Yes. So I look forward to, I've signed up to be on a PIP group, if that's what it's called. Smaller groups studying this, and I've lived here going on 40 years. I will say, when I think of Pondville proper, which is Valley Street, Hill Street, Everett Street, and Little Old Pond Road next to me, I think traffic, 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 and more traffic. I think pass through, pass through, pass through. That's what we are. Valley Street especially, it's a great shortcut between Dedham Street or 1A and Pine Street or 115. Fabulous pass through, especially when the guards get out of prison, or pardon me, get out of their jobs at prison, at the prison. And so I am very concerned about the impact that such a huge building and residential units. There would be, when I added it up, 918 possible vehicles parked on the Southwood site. I can't imagine they would be entering and exiting off of Dedham Street. They would be going from Dedham Street to Pine Street via Valley Street. So that's what it's all about for the residents of Pondville proper. And we have seen the number of cars, trucks, vans, and anything with 4 wheels or 2. I like motorcycles. I used to be on them many, many years ago. I have seen much traffic buildup in this area. So that's my big concern. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
May I ask you just?
Yes.
So what, as far as uses go, could you just, I know you wrote to us, but you don't mind.
I know. You know, it's funny. I did email, you may not have gotten it yet. And I know I wrote to Peter and I said, I've spent so much time complaining about what it is I don't like about the GFI proposed project. I haven't really put together
okay.
I would like. And so I joined some committees that will be forming. So at this point, you know, years ago, I used to think, oh, I think a wonderful Stop and Shop would be great up there. But I don't. Okay. I'm thinking of River's Edge. It seems like a nice community there. There are stores, there are shops, there are residences. It's a community in and of itself. So that was just one possibility that had come to my mind.
Okay.
But this distribution warehouse, et cetera, all that is described in the plan, it will have quite, in my opinion, a negative impact on this part of town down here in Pondville.
Thank you.
So thank you, Rich.
So Ian, next I'll go to Andy.
Hi, I just wanted to start by thanking all of you for going into all the detail. It really helps understand a lot of the complexity with this property and, you know, all the different considerations that need to go into it. I also just wanted to voice my opinion in terms of adding some sort of mix of green space or, you know, recreation to the property as well. Particularly the fact that it abuts next to the rail bed would be really exciting to have a rail trail here in Norfolk. Well, my wife and I will quite frequently, you know, travel to some other town to go on a nice easy bike ride on a rail trail. And if you look at like the Minuteman Trail closer into Boston, it gets a lot of use, particularly, you know, now in the pandemic when everyone is, you know, looking for more spaces outside. I don't know, you know, how it would be possible, but we do also have the you know, the recent purchase from MCI and the Pondville recreation area. And I know that this is, you know, somewhat close to that. And I don't know if they could perhaps complement each other in some way. But just a thought that crossed my mind when I was, you know, thinking about this property. Thanks.
You're welcome. So John Driscoll is next.
Hey, yep. Thank you very much, and thanks so much for hosting this. You know, I think I couldn't agree more with Peter's remarks just a little while ago. I couldn't be against the warehouse project, really in any large scale capacity, for all the reasons that have been mentioned before. To talk a little bit about, you know, what I would like in the space, you know, in a perfect world, green space and parks and trails are wonderful, but there's no profitability there for these types of developers. And I agree with Peter, his, you know, his comments about, you know, a mixture of residential, commercial items that would, you know, people are probably sick of hearing me complain on Facebook about 40B stuff, but the residential impact that continuing to bash through the town, really torment everybody in the center of town, the folks that are out in the new project off of Cleveland Street. It's been quite torturous, and we haven't even gotten the tax impacts that come with that from the schools and everything else. I mean, what I would really like to see for a property like this, like Peter, a mix of residential, commercial, small business type of stuff, or like smaller industrial type of stuff, like kind of like the buildings that are like down by the Adirondack Club, just over the Franklin line, and then 55, you know, or age restricted type of communities that would help us tackle this 40B goal that's constantly bulldozing through the town and prevent additional pressure on the school systems, while also kind of helping us a bit in the tax revenue side. So thank you.
You're welcome. I do there's a couple of things, and then I'll go to Bridget next, just to kind of recap some points. So one, you know, we talked about 40R a little bit. That was just, you know, not proposing that, but just something as an option to give consideration to, relative to the housing component of it. And then just, I did mention it before, and I know, you know, so the idea of the age restricted housing as it relates to 40B, I just want to I'm not suggesting that's a no, but remember, it's at the point from, it's more of a discretionary thing. So we'd have to have a larger conversation, I think, at the state, well, with some different subsidizing agencies to get a better sense of how we relate to 55 and over housing to come back to you as a community to say, look, we have talked to the people who issue a subsidizing letter to a developer to get a better sense where we would be. So yeah, we need to, I will work with Sue Jacobson, the Affordable Housing Director, that we'll need to reach out to those subsidizing agencies and get a sense if how we fit in that mix. So that way, when we go forward, whatever it is, you can have a better sense that, yeah, that is an option for us, or is it an uphill option, no option, where we are. So just we will follow up on that to level set that a little bit. I just wanted to make that, because I know it come up several times tonight. So we need to do a little more homework on that to get back to you all. So Bridget, no, that's not Bridget. Is it Bridget?
Yeah. Well, it's Bridget, but it's fine.
Yeah, sorry.
That's all right. This is the first time I've ever attended a meeting like this, and I wasn't planning on speaking, but I just wanted to add my voice to those who are advocating for real serious oversight with this. I really didn't like the feeling that I got from listening to the gentleman before when he was speaking about they may come back to us with, something worse, and again, Jen Wynn was speaking about the comment regarding the Avalon apartment building. And that is something that I felt like I'm wildly against, but also I kind of don't like the feeling that we are at the mercy of these developers. I want to make sure that whatever project moves forward, that again, there is like very clear oversight guidelines, and that there are sort of exit strategies and things like that are in place to protect us as the townspeople, us as the taxpayers, people who are going to be living here, for many, many, many years to come with, children and families and what have you. So I just wanted to, again, just add my voice to that. I really don't have much more to add to what I would like for the thing, other than like people have said a million times over, the green space would be fabulous. Solar stuff is, obviously wonderful, but I would, the mixed use of the smaller commercial and stuff like that, I think that's gotten pretty uniform approval, or like it's been really well received from everyone that I've sort of anecdotally chatted with. So I just, again, wanted to add my voice to those advocating for those endeavors.
So just to follow up on that other point, so GFI Partners, who presently has the property owner agreement, if they follow, if that goes through and they purchase the property, at least from what they have said to us, they said at the planning board meeting, and they've said to me as well, is that they're trying to work cooperatively with the town. So their approach to this is to work cooperatively with the town and the townspeople. It's not to come in and threaten and come in with a heavy hammer approach to things with the town. So the best I can say, that's what they said, and they'll take them at their word. And then, like I would say, and probably you would say, that actions speak louder than words. So I'll take them at their word, and I think we'll see if they proceed. We'll just have to hold them to their word that they are willing to work with us cooperatively.
But would that be a word like a sort of an old-fashioned handshake word, or is that going to have some guidelines that are committed to in writing? Because I've heard horror stories and other circumstances where a developer came in with a plan, it was approved, and then next thing you know, it's instead of ABC, it's XYZ, and then
but I mean, as far as working,
like what?
Yeah, no, it's not a handshake. I'm just saying from a working arrangement. No, there would be plans. There would be, developers agreement, most likely, a whole bunch of other safeguards in place if it goes all the way through. I'm just talking about initially.
Oh, jeez, I just got off the computer.
Uh-oh.
No, and I.
Excuse me. I'll mute Betsy. So as I find Betsy, Karen had a question, then Jennifer Salvi.
maybe not so much a question as a statement. So,
statement.
you know, I know GFI presented to the planning board back in December, but what about Walpole? I mean, obviously, we're not the only impacted town here. What kind of collaboration has been done with them? Or maybe I'm just suggesting that. Maybe you were going to talk about that during your wrap up.
No, I didn't have it. So we haven't really had any discussions yet with Walpole as of yet. So, I mean, that would have to, you know, that would come forward once we go forward. I will say, interesting enough, you probably, maybe you do know or don't know this. Walpole, when they approved that recreation complex that abuts the Norfolk town line, they specifically prohibited any water extensions to this property for any future development. So I thought it was kind of interesting little, so they're, you know, it just it flavors the conversation a little bit, I think, as we go forward, but we'll have, we'll certainly talk to
Rich, when we were working with George Vallone, not only did they not wish to extend water to the property, they're an MWRA sewer system, and they specifically said they did not want that property to tie into the sewer system, MWRA sewer system. So that was a double whammy in terms of cooperation with Walpole.
Jennifer and then John Driscoll.
Hi, I was just curious. I agree with Bonnie, like many others, on this kind of a well-balanced plan. I was just curious if something like a corporate campus might work there. I believe it was Plainville that also had a large warehouse plan proposed, and they denied it, but were able to get a biotech company offices there instead, on the land that was previously suggested a similar type of warehouse. So I was thinking that might be an option. And then obviously I'm a big proponent of the 55 plus as well for the tax reasons that have been discussed on Facebook. Thanks.
So as you probably, well, we did go over that slide. So biotech's allowed right now, so they certainly could pursue that at the moment without any changes to the zoning. So that I will say I need to understand probably do a little bit more research into Plainville's situation to get, I know, because that started out as a warehouse and then it changed. It was able to switch over to biotech, which I know, as you probably know, you read, I'm sure folks in Plainville were very excited it went that way. I think working with, you know, in the past with this, to get somebody, it usually, they don't do those type projects on spec. So you really have to have a user that wants the facility built. Now you might have something that was permitted and you could flip it and they're already gone through the permitting process, but you know, on spec it usually doesn't happen. So it could happen. They might have somebody and they may want to do it, but it's not as if they're going to build it and they're going to come. They're either going to have somebody that that is seeking space and they want it and they're going to build it for them, or somebody's looking to expand and there's space available and they can be assured from a time frame that that building or that permit that was approved can be built and up and running within a certain period of time. So it's possible. I wouldn't say no, but
isn't that what they're doing with what they're doing with these warehouse projects too, though? I mean,
what you mean permitting?
Building on, well, they, you know, when you asked them, who do you have? They said, we don't know who we have for the warehouse yet. And so either they had somebody in the back pocket like Amazon, or they're certain someone's going to come and get it.
The market, right, for e-commerce is definitely a different market than biotech, as far as there's a demand. Obviously, there is a demand for e-commerce, so they have much better chance of speccing or building on spec and getting somebody, as opposed to a biotech company. That they're usually not spec built biotech and those kind of businesses. They're usually somebody that's interested in doing it. Which again, I think probably is the, rightfully so, everybody's concern related to warehouse, that there's a demand for it.
And Rich, that's the same for any type of corporate campus then. I didn't mean specifically biotech, but any corporate campus, they kind of need someone who wants it built before they go into that. Is that what you're saying?
You're right. No, yeah, you're right. No, I agree. Yeah,
Thank
I didn't mean specific to that. Correct. Yep.
But it can be on the list of considerations, couldn't it? Like, you're not ruling it out by telling us that, right?
Absolutely not. No, I mean, if somebody I'm sure that if somebody wanted to come in and do that today, I think I don't see why we wouldn't be thrilled. I mean, it would bring in tax revenue and potential jobs. Yeah, I mean, just on the surface. So yeah, no, we're not. No, I'm not certainly ruling it out. I don't think the planning board would either, John Driscoll?
So just quick to the corporate campus thing. I think it's a fantastic idea. Obviously, as you said, it's kind of built to spec, with any company that's going to make that kind of headquarter or kind of satellite mini headquarter type of situation. Something like that would be wonderful, and I couldn't support that more. Like a couple other things, and apologies, I missed a few on my list, but thank you, Richard, for clarifying with regards to 40B and that it's 40B or not, and then there's discussions with regards to that age restriction. To kind of piggyback on that, I think that even non-age restriction would be something to be, I open to, giving us a little bit more, for lack of a better word, control of where it is, as opposed to just getting these keyhole projects where they get, just like what we're seeing throughout a lot of the center parts of town. So, I'd be open to ideas of it with regards to scope and, but also leaning towards an age restriction type of thing. One thing I did want to talk about on the warehouse thing is Dedham, and I'm sure it's been beaten to death over and over again. But with a brother-in-law that I have that's in Dedham and only a couple miles from that warehouse, I do know just on the surface it's been a nightmare for people in that town, and that's kind of a first-person account that I've gotten from him on the impact, the traffic. The streets that were never built to manage the type of traffic that's going through, and the infrastructure impact it's having, just in terms of those additional costs for Dedham that they're dealing with. Lucky for them, they have massive commerce and other tax revenue areas that they can leverage to offset that, which a town like us, we don't have. And then the one other thing with a project like this that I'm just hesitant of, especially when it's something that can be regionally impactful, is kind of scope creep from developers. Developers of this size. I've seen it personally while working well in my field, just in a very, very outside point of view, seeing scope creep and how these projects can shift. But we're seeing it right here in town. In my opinion, with the CONC project that's going on, approvals come in, and then there's a little bit bigger ask, and another approval comes in. Then there's an environmental ask, and I just a hyper focus on something like scope creep, especially a project like this where the town has an abundance of leverage in trying to guide and manage the progress is something I just would really want to be held in high importance. So, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I don't see any more hands. I don't know if you want to do a last call or.
Yeah, let's see, it's 9:30. Not that that's important, but
Oh, I just see your hand pop up. See, as I just said last call, huh?
Yeah. It's Peter Diamond.
Yeah, Peter.
Hey, thanks. Through the chairman, can you hear me?
Sure.
Just if I'm last call, I'd like to close out on the property cleanup as the discussion began. I did work on the committee with George Vallone for redevelopment of the Southwood community. There was a lot of discussion about the pollution on the site, the oil, the old building, and the 1 acre dump. And we really don't know what's in that dump. I think George Vallone, at one point, it was considered to just cap that dump and keep the site as a brown site. I was an advocate for total cleanup of the site, and I had hoped the result would be a green site. And hopefully the new developer could work towards that result.
Yeah.
It's a shame that the state originally owned the site and they began the pollution there. They sold the site to the Archdiocese, who continued to contaminate the site. And now the Archdiocese owns the site within an arm of their business that is broke, and they can't clean up the site. It's a shame. And the new developer, hopefully, they take the responsibility and clean the site up correctly. And once again, I'm an advocate for the site to be a green site. Thank you.
Okay, sort of last call for anyone else who'd like to raise their hand and make a comment or ask a question. See anybody?
Just as
Anybody,
closing,
Rich?
just what the next steps are, Rich, and what the residents can expect coming out of this meeting and in the coming months.
So the next step, there are certainly some follow-up that we'll need to answer as we go forward. So we'll have to work on getting those questions and get those posted, some of the things that came up. And I think and one of the next step is to see whether they're continuing and they're going to close to go forward on this property to start the conversation. So there's some stuff we can certainly follow up with, regardless of that, which I'll go back through this meeting, but I know certainly I've touched on a few of those points, and we can get those answers out to everybody. We'll post this on the website, and then I think we'll create a project page on the web page on our website, and we can put information in there to post related to this project, and we'll put out the announcement as well where it can be found. And that's
Yeah, I think we want to be as transparent as we can be as we have further discussions with the developer and make sure that we pass that information along to the townspeople. But we'll see where this goes. It's pretty clear that the residents are not in favor of a warehouse. And that, as Rich said early on in the discussion, is not an allowed use, and in order to become an allowed use would have to be passed by town meeting on a 2/3 vote. Pretty hard to do, frankly, considering the inputs we've heard this evening. Not impossible, I suppose, but pretty hard to do. So if I were a betting man, I'd bet that this developer will probably end up putting something else on that location.
And I, not related to that, but I really do appreciate everybody. We had a lot of people on the Zoom call tonight, and I think it worked really well trying to let everybody get their opportunity to speak and coordinate things. So I appreciate everybody work with us to make that happen.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you for
Hey.
holding the forum.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Rich. Thank
Yes.
you,
Yeah, thank you very
Walter.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rich.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all. It was very useful.
Yes, it was.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.
Good night.